The mules are in the corral. Welcome to Mule Talk, and I'm Cindy K. Roberts, your host.
And my sidekick, our author, TV personality, and world-renowned mule trainer, Meredith Hodges of the Lucky Three Ranch. We're back. Meredith and I were talking briefly. Meredith, you mentioned to me about somebody that didn't look their age, that they looked quite younger. And you know, mules will do that. I mean, look at us.
Right.
Look at all the mule riders out there. They're youthful looking and they're fun to hang with.
I think that's absolutely true. They make you look younger. They make you feel younger.
Yeah.
You're healthier
Sure.
because of the work that they make you do.
Right.
You don't get off easy like you can in the horse industry, you know.
Right.
In fact, I joined the mule industry because I thought it would be easier because I thought, well, it's not going to be as demanding as the equestrian industry was. I knew, for instance, that if I entered a show, a dressage show, or even an AQHA show, that I was not going to be able to compete with the other people. Although I had a wealthy father, he couldn't have had less interest in equines. He was very urban. And my mother took me to a show one time with my quarter horse / saddlebred cross. But, you know, I was only like 11 years old, and I had a good time. I really didn't care about winning or anything, and my saddle wasn't all full of silver, neither was my bridle, and my horse wasn't really that trained. And we rode, and I had a good time, but my mother swore to me afterwards she would never take me to another show because it took her 2 hours to reload my horse to take it home. She didn't want any more of that, but the thing that I found in that kind of experience was that if you didn't have a lot of money and you didn't have a fancy horse and you didn't have a fancy trainer, you weren't going to win. So they were just collecting your entry fees, and my mother saw that as a waste of money. Not to mention the travel time and all the stuff that you have to have. And I guess that's why they call it horse poor when you own horses, because they require a lot of stuff and it's quite costly.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, later on, it was like 1973, I believe, that I started working for her after she put together this Windy Valley Mule Ranch, found that mules were a cheaper way to go, and there are a lot less people doing anything with mules. So I thought, well, the competition isn't going to be as stiff, so I'll get in there and start doing mule shows. At first, I broke her yearlings to lead and did things like that, which didn't require showing. And I did that for 6 years, but when I moved to Colorado in 1980, that's when I really got into showing the mules, so I really had to learn how to do something with them, and I did. But the one thing I found out was they're not as easy to train as horses because they hold you accountable for what you try to do with them. And to say it in a nutshell, they will humble you. And you either change, and you're either going to love them or you're going to hate them.
Right.
Because they call you on everything. At that point in time, I had a choice to make. Am I going to like these mules and really try and become a better person and all of that, by kind of taking the hint from the mules, or what? So I did. And just to remind people, the mule is the product of the successful breeding of a male donkey called a jack and a female horse called a mare. Mules can be either male or female, but they're unable to reproduce because of an odd number of chromosomes in their genetic makeup. It's the pairing up chromosomes that they're missing for conception. And when you're training a mule, you need to take into consideration not only the horse half, but the donkey half as well. And although donkeys are inherently a warm and affectionate and loving creature that thrives on close relationships with their humans, they are also very demanding that you be a really nice person. And they can be very, very stubborn and uncooperative if you don't approach them the right way. And this is where stubborn as a mule came in. It wasn't really the people encountering stubborn animals as much as it is the people were stubborn about how they wanted to do things, And they were quite often very daring and kind of lacking common sense that the animals had. So the animals would not perform for them if they thought it was dangerous, and they have a strong sense of self-preservation, and they're not going to do anything that's stupid. So, the thing that I learned is that close friendships are best developed when positive assets are recognized and any negativity is kept to a minimum. This cultivates good feelings with positive action, and this is what the mules taught me. So if I used my common sense, and if things weren't working, then I could go ahead and people used to tell me, well, if you want a mule to perform for you, you got to, make it so they think it's their idea. That's just another route to identifying assets and everything and learning how to praise the things in other people and animals that are positive. Recognize them. Talk about them. Address it from that standpoint instead of being critical and, you're not doing what I want you to do, so I'm going to force you into it or whatever. My grandmother told me a long time ago that you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. And, of course, being as sassy as I was thinking in my head, well, I don't want to catch flies, and I don't even like honey. So,
there you go.
But I tended to listen to my grandmother anyway. So I knew what she meant. I was just being my sassy self when she said that. But I took it to heart.
All right.
I find that a lot of people are that way. And us humans, we got a lot of faults. We do. And we've got a lot of things we have to overcome if we're going to cultivate a really good relationship with our mules. But in getting into the mule shows, my first mule show that completely inspired me to go ahead and move to Colorado and start my own ranch was when I went to Bishop Mule Days in 1979. And I met Bob Tanner and his son Bobby Tanner. We just lost Bobby Tanner last weekend, and it's very sad. But he was a very inspiring man, as was his father. And nothing set me back on my heels as much as what a great relationship that man had with his 20 mule team and with his family, and how it was so functional and so inspiring because of the kind of people that they were. And believe me, if you've got to make friends with 20 mules to get that result, you can only be an amazing person. There is just no two ways about it. And Bobby and his family have been inspiring me for over 40 years. And they taught me a lot. The mules taught me a lot. If nothing else, Bobby and his wife, Claudia, have been running Bishop Mule Days for as long as I've known about it. And they did it in such a way that they kind of looked upon it as an opportunity to get people together, to have fun, to have camaraderie. It was a rendezvous of all of us who love and respect mules. And they ran the show that way. And the things we identified in the horse shows that were making them really uncomfortable to go to was the snobbery, the money, trying to compete against trained horses and riders that really didn't know what they were doing, but they could do what their trainers told them to do for the 20 minutes it took them to ride a class.
Right.
And that kind of training is very superficial. But the kind of training that you have to do with a mule is so much more in-depth because the mules demand it from you. The horses can be forced. The mules cannot. It inspired a lot, and in 2003, I had written my first book in 1993 and produced the training series in video to follow that. But there were a lot of other things that needed to be added to the training. all kinds of things about handling and management and breeding and what the shows have to offer, kind of things you might want to train for, and all the different diseases that mules can get, no matter how tough they say that they are, they still get sick.
Right.
And you still have to pay attention to all those things. So I decided to come out with a complimentary book called A Guide to Raising and Showing Mules. But the main thing about that book was by that time, by 2003, we had done such a great job of promoting mules and donkeys, and the camaraderie that all these families had, particularly at Bishop Mule Days, where we all got together and we had barbecues and we had the show, and the show kept expanding. Our kids were getting into it, and they wanted to ride mules. A lot of them were in 4-H and FFA and wanted to show mules and even donkeys in their projects. But I was talking to the leaders, and they said that the horse manual didn't really work for mules, because mules are, of course, very unique, and there's a lot of things that you had to do differently with mules than you do with horses, and so their horse manuals didn't really work, so they couldn't allow these kids to have mules in their 4-H club, in their FFA projects. So that's why I wrote that book, was I followed the horse manual, but I put in all the different things that are pertinent to mules and donkeys, so the kids could use long ears for 4-H projects and stuff. And then I ran into the snobbery issue, and they said, oh, well, we're going to have to review your book and see if it's suitable for our kids and our projects and the way we always do things. And I went, oh, brother. But I said, go ahead and do it. You can use it for your projects or you don't. Either the kids can show or they can't. I'm not going to argue with you guys on a political level. This is supposed to be fun, and that's not fun.
Right.
And, competition can be fun and exciting, but it can easily become a devastating experience for both you and your animal if the focus is always winning against others and how to do it, and has all these political aspects to it. I learned from my dressage instructor of 10 years that the focus should not be competing with others. The focus should be to compete against yourself. You start out not knowing a lot of things, and the best thing to do is to open up those lines of communication. Don't keep secrets like the trainers were doing. They were only doing that so they could say, oh, I'll train your animal, because that's what they do in the horse industry. They train your animal so you can compete in the shows effectively, because your animal will know what to do. Because you certainly don't know what to do to train your animal in the beginning. You're faced being very naive to start with. You don't know the first thing about how to train an equine. And then these trainers were telling me, oh, yeah, you don't know enough, but I know all the ins and outs, so if you put your animal with me in training and pay me X amount of dollars, I'll get him so you can show him. I found when I started training animals, when I got good enough to do that, yeah, I could train an animal for somebody else, but that didn't mean the animal was going to perform for them the same way that they perform for me.
Sure.
And especially with mules, mules bond to the people who train them, and they teach you as you go. There were a lot of people dropping off from training mules because they didn't like being humbled.
Right.
I didn't like it either, but but I loved mules, and so I guess it just comes with the territory. And I found that I needed to change my attitude. When I tried to get mules into shows, for instance, people were making up all kinds of excuses on why I couldn't get into their horse shows. And I kind of saw, after fighting with them for a while, I began to understand why they were saying the things that they were. They were, oh, my horse is afraid of your mules. Oh, your mule is going to upset the show. Oh, your mule will never be able to do what we're doing. And I thought, I got to be humble about this. I got to back off And so that's when I developed the attitude of, I really want to compete in your show because you have a lot to teach me. I have nowhere to measure my progress because the mule industry is fairly new insofar as recreation is concerned. But the horse industry's got all these shows that have already been developed where I can actually measure my success by competing with you and learning the things that you have to offer. This is the thing about horse shows. You're able to learn from those who are more experienced than you are, judges, officials, people who've been doing lessons for years. This makes the whole showing experience more enjoyable and mutually beneficial to all, provided they will let you in their shows. And they did. They let me in their shows. And they came to realize that my mules were very good competitors. They kind of opened up and everything. And because I was writing articles about everything, and not keeping things secret as a trainer, I challenged them. I challenged them to let people know some of these secrets. I got told, for instance, that I knew how to use draw reins, and I had developed my hands enough to be able to be quite proficient with the draw reins, and I needed the draw reins to keep my mule from running off with me. Uh-oh. Even in my lessons, I got challenged by my instructor. Sure. We don't use draw reins in dressage, until she saw him running away with me. And she goes, well, maybe we do for a while. And so I said, yes, I'm not going to abuse them. And if I mention them in my articles, I will go ahead and teach people how to get quieter hands by stabilizing their seat and their legs, by keeping their body quiet in the right position so the animal can come to the balance that you're teaching me to do. I will simply write articles about everything that you're teaching me so that people can learn all these secrets that you're teaching me and continue to improve without just sending their animal off and then floundering when they get it back. Because it's a very disheartening feeling when you get your animal back and it's doing what the trainer said it would do for a month, maybe 2 months, 3 at a stretch, and then all of a sudden it falls apart and you can't compete in the classes when the animal isn't happy about the way you're riding it, especially mules. So I thought, well, okay. And then as a trainer, I started talking to people about all these different things, and they were really excited about sharing all of this, and they were even coming to the same conclusions that I did, that when they went to horse shows, they weren't getting the same sharing of information that they were getting at mule shows. So a lot of people went over to mules, and their kids went to mules, and the mule industry began to grow. And one of the stories that I heard from a mother who had 3 boys, her 3 boys really wanted to show mules, and they told her all about the confidence they had after riding their mules and practicing. They wanted to show, and they were sure they were going to win everything. They practiced at home till there were no flaws in their performance, and then the show day arrived. The eldest boy was showing in pleasure driving, and he had no reason to believe his mule would be anything but the steady mule he'd been at home. And so he was all ready to win the class, but to the boy's horror, the mule went to the rail, put his head over the rail, and froze. Needless to say, they didn't place at all. There's a lot to learn about showing, that you can't just force the issue, first of all, but you have to be okay with it, because it's going to be overwhelming for your mule to be in a class with a lot of other animals. And he was just lucky that the mule didn't get all excited about all these vehicles going around him and just run off like a lot of them do. The second boy was in the trail class with his mule, and they had practiced until their performance was flawless. Strangely enough, the gate into the trail class did not look like the gate at home, and his mule wouldn't even go in the arena. So he too was humbled and left the class with nothing. The mother told me the youngest boy took his mule into his classes, and the mule was the same steady animal he had been at home. They finished as high point champion of the show for their division. What do you suppose was the difference in these three cases? I told the mom that I believe that a mule first needs to bond to his handler, and she told me that made perfect sense. She said the other two boys rode and drove their mules and practiced all the patterns and movements they would find in the show. But the youngest boy spent a good part of his time just hanging out with his mule, taking him for walks, feeding carrots, doing very simple and pleasurable things with his mule, as well as a couple times a week practicing the exercises they would need for their class. They were buddies. They were a team. They won the championship because this is how to build a relationship and what good sportsmanship is all about. Good sportsmanship is not only made with your animal or with other people, it's both. You decide what you need to do to identify the assets of the people that you're showing with, that the people that you're having friendships with, even if it's not showing. You know, there's a lot of things like wagon rides, picnic rides, fun shows, just getting together with groups and going trail riding and everything. And it's really just an exercise in how to make friends. And I think that's what my grandmother meant when she said you can catch more flies, friends, with honey, you know, sweetness, than you can with vinegar, a sour attitude.
There you go.
And it took me a long time before I really understood what that meant. And it was the mules that really taught me. And then being open as a trainer and training for the benefit of my clients instead of just training, collecting money, and turning a mule over, and then when there was a complaint, taking it back and taking more money for it. It's not a money experience. It's not even a capitalistic attitude that you should have. If you want your life to be full and joyful and everything, then you need to learn how to identify the things that other people are doing and take an interest in it. And ask them questions about, oh, how are you doing this? You know, I saw you and your mule doing this, and you guys look so good while you were doing that, and I'm having a little trouble with it. Can you give me a few pointers? And really initiate conversation with other people, because you're both going to learn in this experience. And this is how you make friends. People that come in as a Monday morning quarterback and point out all the things that went wrong, that you did wrong in a class, and place blame, really doesn't initiate any kind of a relationship at all. When you're blaming your mule, the mare mule is in heat, or this male mule is just out of his mind, and trying to find reasons that aren't you, why you're failing, that aren't you, is just silly. Fess up. You know, you might be just approaching things the wrong way. And maybe if you consult with your mule or consult with the people that you're socializing with, then you can start a meaningful conversation, and everybody will be happier that way. It doesn't do any good at all to just point out the critical things that are going wrong in anybody's performance. I see a lot of that on Facebook. I try to share what I know with people. Well, why didn't you do this? Or you should do that. First of all, I don't think they understand that what I'm doing takes up all of my time. And I try to do it the best way I know how. And I continue to share with other people. And I do take the criticisms as constructive criticism. It's only when people say, why don't you do this or why don't you do that, that it becomes rather tedious. And I say, well, I have. For instance, lately I got a comment about, why don't you and Cindy, show us you're talking while you're doing this podcast. And
okay.
I had to answer this person, and I answered her, and I said, well, don't you think you'd get a little bored watching us just talk to each other?
Really?
I said, besides, this is a podcast, which is primarily audio anyway.
Right.
If people think that they are so good looking that they can call it a podcast and sit there and talk to you on camera, how long do you think you'd be engaged? You know, you'd be distracted by the video. You wouldn't be listening to what we're saying like you can on something you have to just listen to. You know, besides, in my book, that's not really a podcast. That's a video. And if you take the time to go and look under training on my website, you will see that I have put everything up there on video. So if you want to see what me and Cindy are talking about on video, just go to the places we're directing you to go. Go to the website. Look under training. Find the mule crossing articles, which I'm also posting with our interviews, so that you can see at least photographs with it. And if you want to see the videos, there are corresponding videos under training tips about everything that we're talking about. Very frustrating for me when people think that they're making a constructive criticism and telling me when I should do something that I've already done. And not only have I done it, I've done it in a way that's a whole lot more interesting, and for the sole purpose of sharing what I learned with you so that you can learn too. That's what we do here, right?
You bet. And a lot of people listen to the show while they're driving down the road. I think
right,
that's a plus.
Exactly. And who has time to make time to sit down and watch the podcast when you have so many things you have to do? And driving is one time when you're kind of stuck and you can't do anything else. But this gives you a time when you can do this and you can continue your learning process. And we've identified that. We know that, and that's why we're working so hard to make this available for people. And we want people to learn, because when they do, they're going to be as happy with their animals as we are with ours. And when you do spend that time cultivating a positive relationship with your animal, things do go better. You know, I see a lot of people, for instance, that drill their animals. They think if they go out there and do the pattern over and over and over and make it perfect every lesson, then when they get to the show, they're going to win. And all that does is make you both tired. And as you well know, when you're tired, you don't learn so well. And so then when you get to the show, it's easy to forget. When I was drilling on dressage tests, for instance, I would go to a dressage show, and one of the first ones was quite embarrassing. My mule reminded me that drilling on things is not really a good idea. And we got into our test and got about halfway through it, and I had to stop. I didn't remember what came afterwards. So I had to sit there in my dressage test for about 5 minutes and think about what I was supposed to do next. It finally came to me, but I had already ruined my scores by sitting there for so long. Just another hard lesson, you know.
Yeah.
But my mule was very good. She was perfectly willing to stand still and wait for me to think.
That's good. That's a plus.
Yeah, well, it was. Now, had I been just drilling, and making my mule antsy all the time, she probably wouldn't even have stood still. At that point, I had learned not to force issues. So I did. I stopped trying to force things and just became grateful for the things that happened every day. The little victories along the way. Well, this would have happened before, and it was awful, but this time it's not quite so awful. I also heard, which I found really interesting, because people used to tell me that my mule needed to have a job or he was worthless and not worth spending the money on. And I spent a lot of years thinking about that. I came to the conclusion that while these people were telling me all the time that my mule needed a job, I realized that my equines never told me they needed a job.
Okay.
That's just common sense. We had fun together, and wasn't their job to teach me how to be a better person?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't necessarily to go out and plow the field or anything like that, but we went on to conquer challenges that were quite impressive and really inspired other people to take more time with their mules and not take such offense with them. And they, too, were becoming better people. But even more than that, the things that I got into by challenging myself to do things that were quite impossible, it seemed, for mules in the very beginning, turned out to not be so impossible at all. I took my first mule to 4th level dressage with a snaffle bit. He would not tolerate a full bridle. So I had to do it in a snaffle bit, which doesn't allow you very much control at all if they decide not to do what you want them to do.
Wow.
But this guy, he was perfectly willing to get his body tuned up right so he could do these moves. And the beautiful thing about dressage is it already breaks things down into small steps and a logical, sequential progression that will never overface you or overwhelm you as you move through these levels of performance. And that's kind of how I learned that it's really important to do things this way and to really think about things in terms of building your animal's body up sufficiently with enough steps where one step leads to the next step that leads to the next step so that you're never overwhelmed. And I had no intention of jumping when I started dressage. I had jumped horses, and they just seemed incredibly off balance. And I watched all these people crashing on jumps and thought, I don't want to break my neck. I'm not going to do that. But after going through the dressage training, I realized that my mule had become more balanced, easy to ride. All of my other animals that I was training the same way, my horses included, were easier to ride. There was no such thing as an equine with bad gaits when I did that. Everything on every equine was balanced, easy to ride, and I was able to work on my own balance and my own riding position, which became more secure. And so when I got to 4th level dressage, during the 3rd level practice with my instructor, she goes, you're getting pretty good at this. Don't you think you want to jump? That little mule, maybe CT, strikes me as a mule that can probably do the 3-day event, dressage and combined training. She's not really overly impressive with her dressage, but in combined training, they'll only require you to go to 2nd level with her, but she looks like a heck of a jumper. So I started training in jumping, and for 3 years we practiced, and the first year we got 8th place in combined training, the second year we got 2nd place, and the third year we won against 56 horses in the overall scores in dressage at 2nd level. And then we were jumping between 2.6 and 2.9 on the cross-country course. And that included jumping into water. And I've got an impressive picture where we jumped off this 2-foot bank and into 2 feet of water, which it was hard to get her to walk through the water in the beginning. She'd just walk along, come to a puddle and go, suck it up, and stop, like they do when you're first training them. And then I thought I was going to have a heart attack when my instructor, during one of the practices, says, well, this wagon is going to be in your cross-country course this time. And I went, that wagon? And she says, yeah, no problem. You guys can do it. I said, but that wagon is bigger than both of us. She says, you don't have to think about it. you already have the technique to be able to do this. She says, now trust your mule. You worry about your position and let the mule do the work, and you will be fine. And you know what? She was right. We went over that wagon, and I got a picture of it. And yeah, I look scared to death.
Yeah.
It's not one of my very best pictures. And yeah, I got thrown back a little in my position, but by golly, there was a straight line from my elbow to the bit, you know.
I'll be darned.
And so, Meredith, that's pretty impressive. And it got me to thinking, I learned how to trust my mule. And then I got to thinking about what I read in the Bible, and I saw all these people forcing the issue with these equines. And they kept telling me, we were given dominion over these animals in the Bible. And I started thinking, well, that doesn't really make me a king or a queen over them, now does it? I opened my mind to the new meaning about it all, and I realized that dominion implied keeper of the animals.
Yeah.
Not a king or a queen over them, but a keeper. And I decided I was going to be a responsible keeper and do right by them. And I thought this means I have to have that attitude towards people, too. And when I opened my heart and my mind to my animals and others was when I really discovered how little I knew and how much I had yet to learn. I realized at that time that this would be an endless endeavor, but a lot of time to share and actually enjoy my life. As I began to share the experiences in my career with others, instead of trying to sell everything or beat everybody, I was made aware of so many others shared with me and how much smarter and compassionate I was becoming. The way I treated my long ears evolved, and the responses I got from them were nothing short of amazing, to say the least. Then I had the epiphany about what it really was. I was no longer using my mules and donkeys. I appreciated what they gave to me, and the gifts they gave just kept coming. They were now true companions, partners, friends, and our experiences together were quite literally becoming joyful. And other people were reaching the pinnacle of their performances as well, with all the sharing that we've done together. The American Donkey and Mule Society was founded in 1967, at which time mules and donkeys began to make their debut in America as recreational animals instead of merely working and farm animals. Their presentation in exhibitions, parades, and New Long Ears Show were made public, and the public was eating it up. They thought at first these long ears were really funny because of their ears and everything, but when they finally saw what they could do, they were just amazed. And I knew that my approach to training was annoying a lot of old-timers. And a lot of them were persuaded that, mules were stubborn, hard to handle. One had to get their attention with a 2x4, and they were dangerous, and other relatively negative things. In fact, when I moved to Colorado, there was an Appaloosa breeder that lived not too far from me, and he came down here and saw little Jack Horner as a yearling. He goes, "Is that a Jack?" And I said, "Yeah." "You better be careful. They are really dangerous." I said, "I know, and I'm going to breed mules, and so I kind of have to have him." "Well, you better not go in the pen with him because he'll attack you." And I said, "Well, I kind of have to go in the pen with him to catch him, to use him for breeding later on. But I'm planning on training him to be a good guy, so we're gonna do that." And he goes, "Well, more power to you, I guess, And the humane training that little Jack Horner got was good. And I knew that my training approach was going to be met with skepticism and contempt. And I was right about it. I had embarked on a journey that would define my entire career, though. But with my own stubbornness and conviction, I've been able to show folks a better approach. And a lot of the old-timers started looking at me, and at first they were kind of critical, like we were talking about earlier, and they would laugh at me. And, in fact, I got set up with a mule. They were laughing. They saw me down in Colorado Springs at a show doing a reining pattern and pleasure classes and everything, and they said, oh, well, that lady claims to be a mule trainer, but she's not really a mule trainer. She just thinks she is. She trained that one mule. They brought a mule up to me and said that they wanted to get him trained, and he'd been out to pasture for 2 years, had been used in a drill team. So they just wanted him tuned up. And I said, okay. I still to this day remember the mule's name. His name was Jethro. And I was not expecting Jethro to be what Jethro was, not even a little bit. First, I had to catch him. I got him up here and put him in the pen, but he didn't want to be caught. He was absolutely panic-stricken. And I thought, well, he's been out on pasture, he hasn't been messed with or anything. And he was like, 7 years old or something like that. So I thought, well, he had training, and then he was put out, and nobody used him, so I'll keep trying. It took me 2 months to catch that guy. And then the training began, and these guys only gave me 90 days to get him ready for their drill team again.
Oh, boy.
So I thought, well, okay, I can catch Jethro now, and he's had a saddle on, so that's okay. We'll just get the saddle on, and we'll take it slow, and we'll get into the round pen, and then we'll get into the arena, and we'll get her done. So I just did things as Jethro would let me do. And then finally, I had Jethro doing reining patterns. He would slow down for pleasure. He would slide, stop, spin, and everything else because he liked me. He just liked me, like that kid that that mother was telling me about, So I discovered the value of that, and those two guys came back up to pick him up. First of all, they sounded kind of strange on the phone. And I said, yeah, Jethro's ready to be picked up now. And they said, well, we're coming up then. And it was a heavy guy and a skinny guy. It was like Laurel and Hardy, I swear to God. But
oh, no.
So they came up, and I said, okay, who wants to ride him first? And they looked at each other, and they looked terrified. And I said, no, he's really okay. Got him for you. I got him done for you. So who wants to ride him first? They go, we think you should. And so I go, okay. So I got out there, and I did the pleasure, walk, trot, canter, reverse, and all that. Then I went ahead and galloped him in a figure eight and did flying lead changes and sliding stops and spins, and their jaws were all the way to the floor. And the skinny guy goes, well, I'll try him now. So he got out there, and he goes, hey, he's doing really good, man. While he was out there riding, the heavier guy was talking to me, and he goes, you know what? I got to eat crow. He said, we set you up. This mule is a mule that nobody could ever even ride.
Oh.
We couldn't use him in the drill team because he bucked off so many riders. And we thought this would be a really good test for you as a mule trainer, and we would see whether you're a real mule trainer or not. And he goes, I guess you are. I was kind of mad that those guys set me up like that. They could have got me hurt.
Well, sure.
But they weren't thinking about that. But a lot more people and a lot of old-timers have come to my way of training because these old-timers are now aging, and they want to be safe, too. But they want to keep up their relationships with their mules. And they realize that with age goes all the strength that you used to have as a young person to force a lot of issues. And it would be better if your mules were more inclined to do of their own accord when you ask them politely than having to force issues. Granted, they did a lot of training over a lot of years, And so the mules were well on their way to figuring out what their owners were really all about anyway, and how to avoid fights with them. So they were halfway there anyway. There are still those trainers out there that think that they've got to force the issue and everything, but I remind them that if you prepare the bodies of your animals properly, then there's a lot of things they will be able to do without hurting themselves that may have been something that you have forced before, like going up steep hills, rock jumping, and all of this other stuff. I learned in the cross-country course. I mean, we did a lot of that stuff anyway, but I had spent 3 years getting my animal in good physical shape to do it. And so she was able to do this stuff at a later age without really hurting herself. It was my experience, too, that a lot of these old-timers that did pretty tough things with their mules were still able to do it at the later date in their age. And they could continue to do it because they kind of went on pause and revisited the physical conditioning. So it's really important that you look at training from the standpoint of getting an athlete prepped for what you're doing, and not just look at doing things. That's important, that you don't do this, and that you do develop those relationships intimately by considering the other person, the other mule, for instance, and taking an interest in where they're at and how you can best enhance their experience and not just be competitive and beat them. A lot of the old-timers now are taking multiple hitches into parades and stuff, the least of which is not the 20 mule team that has been exhibiting all over America. What a thrill they are to behold. I really hope that Bobby Tanner has been apprenticing a driver to take his legacy forward. It needs to go forward because he's the epitome of all of it. He shows you what you can really have when you take the time to develop that relationship that you have with your animals and with the people, the audience that you have. Bobby Tanner is revered by a lot of people all over the world for the work that he's done. And he was such a mild-mannered, family-oriented, patriotic American that really shared everything he had to share with people. And in that respect, I can say that there has been a light shown on the mules of the past. Those that thought mules could not be controlled are now enjoying the companionship of their own leading celebrities of the equine community. So my advice would be to reject criticism, reject negativity, and become a member of this new world of long ears and experience the joy they have to offer. It's quite simply awesome.
I have learned so much by listening to our own podcast, just from all the expertise that you've had over the years. So this is really amazing.
I find it really amazing, too. And what's even more amazing is this stuff I'm sharing with you on the podcast. It took me 40 years to learn all this stuff. From who? The mules.
You bet.
Primarily the mules.
Yeah, and when you've been doing it for so long, you think, well, I do know a lot. And then the next day, you go out and you learn more. I mean, every day is a new day.
Exactly. I used to think that learning was finite in the equestrian, world. You learn how to ride a balanced seat. You learn all these patterns. You learn this, you learn that, and then it's done. Nothing could be further from the truth. There is something new to learn about every single day, and these mules have something to teach me every single day. And we're all getting a little old here, too. But I find that what they teach me, here's an important component, that when you're learning from a mule, it's funny. It's humorous.
Right.
They don't let you be in a bad mood. If you go ahead and control your own bad mood and you try to approach things politely and considerably, repetitiously, routinely, so they know what to expect from you, and you don't create anxiety, the learning process never ends. Now, I have 8 mules out in the dirt pen that I have to go and groom today. And I really look forward to grooming because it's hilarious. I go out there with my grooming tools in a bucket when I've got a group of animals like that together. But they have all learned, first of all, I don't take the fanny pack out in the middle of the herd with me. But I have taught them when we're all done grooming, you will all get your 2 cups of oats in the buckets along the fence.
Wow.
So I go out there and I don't set myself up to be bombarded.
Right.
They have learned through repetition what we're going to do. So I go out there with my bucket and I first go down the line with everybody and buzz their bridle paths. The hilarious thing about it is they all line up and they all know who gets to go first and they line up in that order. And I just go right down the line, do the bridle paths first. And then I go along, and if anybody's got mud on them, I go along with the shedding blade and get the mud off of them. And then I go ahead and I take my hairbrush and my baby oil, and at this time of the year you can do that. In the wintertime you got long coats to deal with, and in the spring you've got shedding, and it takes a little longer with the brush. But I still use that hairbrush for shedding, and it's amazing. They shed faster with that thing.
Yeah.
And here they are. They're all lined up, and so I take the baby oil with me too, and I start at the front, and they're lined up, and I sprinkle the baby oil into the mane, and then I go ahead and take it down the neck and across the body, and then I go around to the other side and go down the body on the other side. And then when I get to the tail, I sprinkle the baby oil in the tail, and then I notice that everyone has turned around with their butts towards me to do the tails. And they all line up. So I'm on that first one, and I go, oh, well, it might be easier if I just put this baby oil in all the tails at once. Then I can go back to the fronts of all these animals and then just go down the bodies and everything. And by the time I get to the tail, I can set down the baby oil. I don't have to carry it, and I can just run down the tails. So I do. And they just stand there all in a little row, and we do tails. And then I go ahead and grab the fly spray, and I fly spray down the line, and everybody gets fly sprayed. And then they all walk over to their little pans, spaced 16 feet apart on the fence, and they wait for me to go get the big bucket of oats with the 1.5 cup scoop, and then I can just go down the line and pour 1.5 cups in each of those little pans, and everybody's really happy. And then when they're all done with that, then they all go to the turnout gate and they get turned out on grass. They love it.
Wow.
And it doesn't take me more than an hour and a half to do 8 of them, or no, to do 16 of them.
Oh,
because
my gosh.
after I finish the ones in the dirt pen, then I go to turn out the other ones are, and they're lining up for me too. They're not running off. And when I go out in the pen, they all clump around me to get their grooming done first, and they all turn around with their butts to me when it's time to do tails. It's hilarious. I have to laugh.
Oh, I love it.
My website is at www.lucky3ranch.com, and I have a second one for children at jasperthemule.com. We also have a Facebook page, Meredith Hodges public figure page. I do have a personal page, but it's maxed out, but I also put the same thing on both pages. And if you don't find what you want posted on Facebook or on my website, you are welcome to email me at meredith@lucky3ranch.com, and I answer all my mail promptly. And you can also call me at 1-800-816-7566. If you don't get me straight up, leave a message. I answer all my calls too.
Gotta go. My mule is looking for me.
Mule Talk is an Every Cowgirl's Dream production.